The first thing that hit Liam when he walked through the door was the silence. Not the peaceful, late afternoon quiet he was used to, but a deep, hollow silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The air was still and cold, carrying the faint, sterile scent of lemon cleaner instead of the warm aroma of Chloe's baking or the earthy fragrance of her oil paints. He dropped his briefcase by the door, the soft thud echoing unnervingly in the foyer. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. "Chloe?" he called out, his voice sounding small and foreign in his own home. "I'm home, honey." No reply. He walked through the archway into the living room. Everything was pristine, disturbingly so. The throw pillows on the sofa were perfectly fluffed, the stack of art history books on the coffee table squared away. This was not the happy, lived-in chaos of their life. It was the sterile order of a house preparing for a showing. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. "Chloe," he called again, louder this time, a tremor of fear lacing his voice. Their bedroom was empty, the bed made with military precision. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He leaned against the doorframe, scanning the room. That's when he saw it. Propped against the pillows, in the exact center of their king-sized bed, was a single, folded piece of cream-colored stationery. Chloe's favorite kind. With trembling hands, he walked over and picked it up. Her name wasn't on it, nor was his. It was simply there, waiting. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the elegant, looping script. "My dearest Liam, I'm so sorry to do this. I know the timing is terrible, with the baby coming, but I can't pretend anymore. This life, this house, it isn't me. I feel like I'm suffocating, playing a part that was never written for me. I need to find myself again, the woman I was before all of this. I need space to breathe, to paint, to just be. Don't try to find me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Please try to understand. I'll always love you in my own way. Chloe." The paper fluttered from his numb fingers. Suffocating? This life they had built, the one he worked 60-hour weeks to maintain, the home they had lovingly renovated in anticipation of their daughter's arrival, was a cage? The words blurred through a sudden film of tears. He stumbled back, his legs hitting the edge of an armchair, and sank into it. He looked around the room, at the half-finished mural of a moon and stars on the nursery wall, visible through the open door, at the sonogram picture taped to her vanity mirror, at the sheer emptiness of it all. 7 months pregnant. His wife was 7 months pregnant, and she had just walked away. The silence of the house was no longer hollow. It was screaming with betrayal, a sound only he could hear. The note was her voice, her words, her final, devastating judgment on their marriage. He buried his face in his hands, the carefully constructed world he called his own shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The police were polite, but unhelpful. Detective Miller, a man with tired eyes and a weary smile, read the note twice. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "your wife is an adult. She's pregnant, yes, and that's a concern. But she left a note. It's written in her hand, on her stationery. It explicitly says not to look for her. From where we stand, there's no evidence of foul play. She just left." Liam felt a surge of frustrated anger. "She's 7 months pregnant. She has no family in this state besides her sister. Where would she go? She wouldn't just leave everything behind. The baby's room, her studio. People do things we don't expect, especially under stress," Miller countered, handing the note back. "Hormones, anxiety about motherhood, maybe some marital issues you weren't aware of. We'll file a report, of course. If she doesn't use her credit cards or contact anyone within 72 hours, we can reevaluate. For now, my advice is to give her the space she asked for. Space. The word felt like a slap. He wanted to scream that his unborn child didn't have space to be born on the street. But he just nodded, feeling the door to official help closing in his face. The next calls were even harder. First, to his own parents, whose shocked grief quickly morphed into a barrage of frantic, unanswerable questions. Then to Chloe's sister, Maya. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice tight with alarm. "Liam, what's wrong? I've been trying to call Chloe all afternoon." He choked on the words. "She's gone, Maya." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Like, to the store?" "No, she left. She packed a bag and left a note." He read the note to her, his voice breaking on the final line. There was a long, terrible silence on the line, punctuated only by a shaky sob. "Oh, Liam. Oh, God, no." Maya's voice was a whisper of pure devastation. I knew she was feeling overwhelmed. But I never thought. She said she was feeling a little trapped, that the mural wasn't coming out right. But I just thought it was pregnancy jitters. Her words were like small, sharp stones pelting his already bruised heart. She'd confided in Maya, but not in him. "She told you she felt trapped?" "Not in those exact words," Maya said quickly, as if backtracking. "More like anxious, worried she was losing her identity, you know, becoming just a mum. I told her it was normal. I told her you loved her." More sobbing. "I should have paid more attention. I should have called you." No, it's not your fault," Liam said, the words automatic. He felt a strange need to comfort her, the only other person who might understand the depth of this loss. In the days that followed, Maya became his rock. She came over with casseroles he couldn't eat, helped him field calls from concerned friends, and sat with him in the suffocatingly quiet house. She was a whirlwind of practical grief, her face a mask of worried sorrow. I checked her favorite retreats, the art colonies she used to go to upstate, Maya reported one evening, her brow furrowed with concern as she scrolled through her phone. Nothing. It's like she vanished into thin air. I hate this, Liam. I hate thinking of her out there alone, and pregnant. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Have you thought about what she wrote? About feeling suffocated?" Liam flinched. "I thought we were happy." Maya reached across the table and placed a hand on his. It was cool and steady. "You were. But Liam, you work so much. You're a wonderful provider. But you're gone before she wakes up and home, after she's already exhausted. Maybe she just felt lonely, like she was going through this huge life change all by herself. The accusation, gentle as it was, landed with the force of a punch. It was true. He had been pushing for a promotion, staying late, taking on extra projects to ensure they'd have a massive cushion when the baby arrived. He'd seen it as an act of love, of provision. Had she seen it as abandonment? Maya's words, born of sisterly concern, planted a seed of guilt that began to sprout, its thorny vines wrapping around his heart. He was the reason she'd left. He had driven his pregnant wife away through his ambition and neglect. The narrative was solidifying, and Maya, his caring, supportive sister-in-law, was the one cementing its foundation. He was the villain of this story. A week bled into 2. The initial frantic panic subsided, leaving a dull, chronic ache in its place. Liam moved through his days like a ghost in his own life, the silence of the house a constant, oppressive companion. He'd walk into the nursery and stare at the half-painted moon, his hand resting on the smooth wood of the empty crib. He was sleeping on the sofa, unable to bear the vast, empty space in their bed where Chloe should be. He found himself rereading the note, sometimes 10 or 20 times a day. He'd traced the letters with his finger, trying to feel her presence in the ink. But the more he read it, the more a strange dissonance began to hum beneath the surface of his grief. "I'll always love you in my own way." Chloe was passionate, direct. She wasn't one for qualifiers. She'd say, "I love you," or she wouldn't. The phrase felt constructed. It was the kind of thing one writes in a high school yearbook, not a goodbye letter to a husband. This life, this house, it isn't me. She had picked out this house. She had spent a year joyfully choosing paint colors, fabrics, and furniture. She loved their home. She called it their nest. Why would she suddenly describe it as a prison? These were small things, tiny threads sticking out from an otherwise smooth fabric of betrayal. He tried to dismiss them as the ramblings of a desperate mind trying to find an alternate reality. Maya was right. He had neglected her. His guilt was a powerful filter, coloring everything he saw. One rainy Tuesday, while aimlessly scrolling through his phone, he came across a photo from a few months ago. It was a selfie Chloe had taken in their yard. She was beaming, her hand cupping her small but growing baby bump. In the background, Maya was smiling over her shoulder, her arm wrapped around Chloe. He remembered that day. They had spent the afternoon planting a garden. He'd been on a conference call for most of it, watching them from his office window, feeling a pang of regret that he couldn't join them. He zoomed in on the photo. On Maya. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something tight around her mouth, a flicker of an expression he couldn't name. He scrolled back further, through months of photos. Barbecues, birthdays, holidays. And in every picture, when she looked at Chloe, at their life, he saw it again. That faint, almost imperceptible shadow of... what? Resentment? Envy? He shook his head, disgusted with himself. Maya had been nothing but a saint. She was grieving for her sister, supporting him, holding him together. And here he was, manufacturing conspiracies out of a photograph, but the thread had been pulled. Later that week, he was cleaning out the fridge, throwing away the casseroles he'd never touched, when he found a container of Chloe's favorite lemon rosemary chicken. His throat tightened. He remembered the last time she'd made it, just 2 days before she disappeared. They'd eaten dinner on the patio. She had seemed happy, excited. She spent 20 minutes describing how she wanted to teach their daughter how to paint, how she couldn't wait to see the world through a child's eyes. These were not the words of a woman planning to flee. He sat down at the kitchen island, his mind racing, trying to stitch together the days before she left. Chloe had been a little quiet, yes, but she'd blamed it on being tired. Maya had come over the day Chloe disappeared. She'd said she was bringing some maternity clothes she'd found on sale. Liam had been at the office. He'd come home to the empty house just a few hours later. He remembered Maya's words on the phone. "I've been trying to call Chloe all afternoon. Why? If she had just seen her, why would she be calling her all afternoon?" It was a small inconsistency, but added to the others it felt like a snag. The wording of the note. The look in Maya's eyes. The happy dinner. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff in a thick fog, sensing a deep chasm before him, but unable to see it clearly. His grief was slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to curdle into suspicion. The box had been sitting in the corner of the nursery for a month, a painful monument to a future that had been stolen. It contained the high-tech baby monitor Liam had insisted on buying. It was one of the fancy ones with a crystal-clear HD camera, two-way audio, and a cloud-based recording feature. Overkill, Chloe had teased him. It's a baby, not a bank vault. He had decided to finally clean out the nursery. It was a form of self-flagellation, a way to confront the pain head-on. As he broke down the crib, his hands shaking, he saw the box. On a whim born of pure, gut-wrenching nostalgia, he took the camera out. He remembered plugging it in the day it arrived, just to test the connection to his phone. He'd placed it on top of the bookshelf, aimed at the crib, and then promptly forgot about it, caught up in another project. It had been plugged in for weeks before Chloe vanished. A cold dread, sharp and electric, prickled down his spine. He sank to the floor, pulling out his phone. His fingers felt thick and clumsy as he navigated to the app for the camera. He'd forgotten the password, fumbling with it twice before it finally logged him in. The app opened to a live view of the empty, half-dismantled nursery. He navigated to the event history. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He scrolled back, past weeks of empty recordings triggered by dust motes floating in sunbeams. He went to the date. The day Chloe disappeared. He found a clip from that afternoon, labeled Motion Detected. 2:17 p.m. He tapped it. The video loaded. The frame was filled with the nursery, the mural, the bookshelf, the rocking chair. The lighting was soft, autumnal. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a figure entered the frame from the left. It was Maya. She was holding a piece of cream-colored stationery and a pen. Liam's breath caught in his throat. She walked to the center of the room, her back partially to the camera. She seemed to be looking for something. She glanced around, then walked over to the dresser, where Chloe kept her art supplies and a box of her personal stationery. Maya paused, then walked back toward the center of the frame, but she didn't have the single sheet anymore. She had the whole box. She sat in the rocking chair, the one Chloe had spent a weekend refinishing. She placed the box of stationery on her lap, and then, with slow, deliberate movements, she began to write. Liam zoomed in, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold the phone. He could see her brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth, just as it did when she was a child. She was mimicking something. He watched as she painstakingly formed each letter, her hand moving with an unnatural slowness. She was copying Chloe's handwriting. After a few minutes, she held up the paper, comparing it to another sheet she pulled from her pocket. Likely an old birthday card or letter from Chloe. A small, tight smile of satisfaction crossed her face. She carefully folded the note she had just written and placed the one she used for copying back in her pocket. Then she stood up, walked out of the nursery, and out of the frame. The video ended. Liam dropped his phone. It clattered to the hardwood floor, but he didn't hear it. The sound roaring in his ears was the sound of his entire reality, collapsing for a second time. It wasn't Chloe's betrayal. It was Maya's, the casseroles, the comforting words, the gentle accusations aimed at him. It was all a lie. A calculated, monstrous performance. She had sat in this very house, feigning grief while knowing everything. She had not only orchestrated Chloe's disappearance, she had authored it. She had written the words that had shattered his heart. He scrambled for the phone, his mind a maelstrom of rage and terror. He didn't know where Chloe was or if she was safe, but he now knew who was responsible. And he was looking at her face, recorded for all time by a silent, plastic witness on a bookshelf. The 20-minute drive to Maya's suburban townhome felt like an eternity. Liam's hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that his knuckles were white. The video played on a loop in his mind. Maya's furrowed concentration, her small smile of triumph. Every comforting word she had spoken to him in the past 2 weeks now felt like a shard of glass in his gut. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in his chest, so potent it almost choked him. He didn't bother knocking. He used the spare key Maya had given him in case of emergencies and burst through the door. She was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she chopped vegetables. She looked up, a bright, welcoming smile on her face. "Liam!" "What a surprise. I was just making some soup. I can pack some up for you." "Where is she?" he snarled. The sound that came out of him was guttural, animalistic. It was a voice he didn't recognize as his own. Maya's smile faltered. She placed the knife down slowly, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Where is who?" "Honey, what are you talking about? Are you okay?" "Don't you honey me," he spat, advancing on her. "Don't you dare. Where is Chloe?" "Liam, you're scaring me," she said, her voice taking on a wounded, trembling quality. "I don't know where she is. We've been over this. I wish I did, more than anything." "Stop lying," he roared, slamming his hand down on the butcher block counter. The vegetables jumped. Maya flinched, a flicker of genuine fear finally crossing her face. "I know you wrote the note, Maya. I have proof." For a split second, her mask of concern slipped. He saw it, a flash of pure, cold panic. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by practiced indignation. "Proof? What are you talking about? You're grieving, Liam. You're not thinking straight. How could you accuse me of something so horrible?" He pulled out his phone, his hand still shaking with adrenaline. He didn't say another word. He just hit play and turned the screen toward her. The color drained from her face as she watched herself in the nursery, meticulously forging the note that had destroyed his world. The humming from the radio suddenly seemed obscenely cheerful. The phone's tinny audio was the only sound in the room as Maya's on-screen doppelganger completed her work. When the video ended, she stared at the black screen, her mouth slightly agape. "The baby monitor," she whispered, her voice raspy with disbelief. "You set up the baby monitor." "Where is she?" Liam repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Where did you send her? Is she safe?" The facade crumbled completely. The supportive sister-in-law vanished, replaced by a woman contorted by a lifetime of resentment. Her face hardened, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. "Safe? Of course she's safe. She's probably safer than she ever was with you. What did you do?" "I helped her!" Maya shrieked, her voice rising hysterically. "I did what she was too weak to do for herself. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch her just float through life? Everything was always handed to Chloe. The talent, the looks, the rich, successful husband who would give her anything she wanted. While I worked my fingers to the bone at a dead-end job, dealing with my deadbeat ex and his debts, she was planning a nursery in her perfect house." Her words tumbled out, a torrent of jealousy held back for decades. "She was complaining to me, you know. Complaining. Oh, Liam's working so much. Oh, I'm so tired, I don't feel creative." She had everything, and she didn't even appreciate it. She was suffocating. I'm the one who has been suffocating. Liam stared at her, horrified. This was not about concern for Chloe. This was a coup. You manipulated her. You told her lies about me. "I told her the truth," Maya shot back, "that you were a neglectful workaholic who cared more about his blueprints than his pregnant wife. I told her she needed to get away, to a place where she could clear her head before the baby came. A special retreat for expecting mothers. No phones, no internet. A place to disconnect from all the stressors in her life. Like you, a retreat. No phones." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Maya had isolated her. "Where is it, Maya?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Give me the name. Give me the address." "Now," she looked at him, a sneer twisting her lips. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. But seeing the raw fury in his eyes, the absolute resolve that he would tear her house apart, piece by piece if he had to, her defiance finally broke. She scribbled an address on a notepad and shoved it at him. The Whispering Pines Wellness Sanctuary. In the Berkshires, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. Go play the hero. But don't think for a second this changes anything. You still failed her. I just gave her the push she needed. He snatched the paper from her hand and turned without another word, leaving her alone in her silent kitchen, the mask of her betrayal finally, irrevocably, cast aside. The drive to the Berkshires was a frantic, 3-hour blur of winding roads and the darkening green of the New England landscape. Liam's mind was a frantic cacophony of fear and hope. Was Chloe okay? Did she believe Maya's lies? Would she even want to see him? The questions were a torment, each one a fresh stab of anxiety. The Whispering Pines Wellness Sanctuary was less a sanctuary and more a high-end prison. A sprawling modern lodge set deep in the woods, it had an air of forced tranquility. He parked in the guest lot and ran to the main entrance, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A serene-looking woman at the front desk greeted him with a placid smile. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. How may we help you find your peace today?" "I'm looking for my wife," Liam said, breathless. "Chloe Hayes. She's a guest here." The woman's smile didn't waver. "I'm sorry, sir, but to maintain our guest's privacy and digital detox, we cannot confirm who is staying with us. All communication must be initiated by the guest upon their departure." "This is an emergency," Liam insisted, his voice rising. "Her sister sent her here under false pretenses. She's 7 months pregnant, and she needs to come home with me." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice," the woman said, her calm demeanor beginning to crack. "Our guests come here to escape stressful situations." "I'm her husband! She's my wife!" he yelled, slamming his hands on the polished birchwood desk. He was losing control, but he didn't care. The thought of Chloe being just a few 100 feet away, trapped by protocol and lies, was unbearable. Suddenly a soft voice from behind him said, "Liam." He spun around. There, standing at the bottom of a grand staircase, was Chloe. She was wearing a simple white linen dress provided by the retreat. Her hair was tied back, and her face was pale. Her eyes, wide and questioning, were fixed on him. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. Relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. "Chloe," he breathed, moving toward her, but she took a step back, her hand held up to stop him. The hurt and confusion in her eyes were a physical blow. "What are you doing here?" Maya said. "She said you needed space, that you felt trapped by the baby coming." The world tilted on its axis. Maya hadn't just lied to him. She had created a perfect, poisonous mirror image of the lie. She had used Chloe's own anxieties and insecurities and turned them back on her, painting Liam as the one who wanted to escape. "No, Chloe, no," he said, his voice cracking. He stopped where he was, not wanting to scare her. "That's not true. None of it is true. Maya lied to you. She lied to both of us." Chloe's brow furrowed. "Lied?" "Liam, she showed me text messages, from you to her. You said you weren't ready for this, that you were thinking of leaving. Forged texts. Of course. Maya had been planning this for months. They weren't real, honey. She made them up. Just like she made this up." He pulled the folded note from his pocket, the one he'd carried with him for 2 weeks, and held it out to her. "She wrote this. She pretended it was from you." Chloe stared at the note, then back at his face. Her expression was a painful mix of disbelief and dawning horror. "Wrote it? But that's my stationery, my handwriting." "She forged it, Chloe. She practiced. I have a video of her doing it." He took a tentative step closer. I came home, and you were gone. This note was on our bed. I thought you'd left me. I thought you didn't want me, or our baby. For 2 weeks I've been living in hell, thinking I drove you away." Tears began to stream down Chloe's face as the enormity of her sister's betrayal began to sink in. She looked from the note in his hand to the raw, desperate pain on his face. She saw the truth there. She saw the man she loved, shattered and terrified, not the cold, distant husband Maya had described. "She told me you wanted me to come here," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "She said it was your idea, a way for me to have a gentle separation before you ended things for good. She said you thought I was unstable." He closed the distance between them, finally, and wrapped his arms around her. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against him, her body shaking with violent sobs. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her. She was real. She was here. She was safe. She lied, he whispered into her ear, over and over again, like a prayer. "It was all a lie. I never wanted you to leave. I want you. I want our daughter. I want our life back." They stood there in the silent, sterile lobby of the Whispering Pines, two people caught in the wreckage of a devastating deception, holding on to each other as the truth, ugly and liberating, finally came to light. The reunion was not one of simple joy, but of shared trauma and profound, aching relief. They had found each other, but the path back home was going to be longer and harder than either of them could imagine. The drive home was heavy with a silence that was vastly different from the one that had haunted Liam for weeks. It wasn't an empty silence. It was dense, filled with unspoken questions, pain, and the fragile, terrifying task of rebuilding. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the passing trees, her hand never leaving her stomach. When they walked back into their house, she stopped in the foyer and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. It was the same space she had left, but the emotional landscape had been irrevocably altered. Liam saw it through her eyes. The place where the lie began. The stage for her husband's imagined betrayal. "I'm so sorry, Chloe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't paying enough attention, that I let my work consume me. I gave Maya the space to do this. I made you feel alone." Chloe finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "And I'm sorry I believed her," she said softly. "There was a part of me that knew it didn't sound like you, but I was so scared. I felt so big and clumsy and lost, and she knew exactly what to say. She used all my deepest fears against me, against us." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat at the kitchen table and talked for hours, the first truly honest conversation they'd had in a year. The carefully constructed walls they had built around their individual anxieties came tumbling down. Liam confessed the intense pressure he felt to be the perfect provider, a pressure that stemmed from his own father's financial failures. He admitted that he'd buried himself in work as a way to control his fear of not being good enough for her and their coming child. He had been so focused on building the scaffolding of their life that he had forgotten to live inside it with her. The power imbalance wasn't one of malice, but of neglect. He held the financial power, and in his obsessive focus on it, he had rendered her emotionally powerless. Chloe, in turn, shared the profound identity crisis that had been brewing within her. She confessed her terror of her art being subsumed by motherhood, of her name changing from Chloe the artist to simply Mom. She admitted that his long hours had made her feel like a secondary character in her own life, a ghost haunting the beautiful home he provided. Her vulnerability had been a fertile ground for Maya's poison. They talked about Maya. Chloe cried, not with the sharp grief of loss, but with the hollow ache of a deep, primal bond being severed. She was my big sister, she whispered, wiping away tears. She was supposed to be the one person in the world, besides you, who would protect me. How could she hate me that much? Hate us? Liam had no answers. He could only hold her hand and listen, feeling the shards of their broken trust beginning to knit back together. Not seamlessly, but into something new, a mosaic bonded by shared pain and a brutal, clarifying honesty. The next morning, Chloe walked into the nursery and stared at the unfinished mural. Liam stood in the doorway, watching her. She traced the outline of the pale, half-painted moon. "I couldn't finish it," she said, her back to him. Maya told me it looked amateurish, that pregnancy had probably dulled my talent. Liam's jaw tightened. The cruelty was bottomless. Chloe turned to face him, a flicker of her old fire in her eyes. "I'm going to finish it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And then I'm going to call her." Liam started to protest, to say he would handle it, but he stopped himself. This was her betrayal to confront, her power to reclaim. All he could do was stand by her. Later that day, she made the call. Liam sat beside her on the sofa, holding her hand as she put the phone on speaker. Maya answered, her voice syrupy sweet. "Chloe? Oh my God, is that you? Where are you? Are you okay? Liam has been going out of his mind." "I'm home, Maya," Chloe said, her voice steady and cold. "I'm home with my husband." There was a pause. Oh, good. I'm so glad he found you. I was so worried." "Stop it," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the facade. "Just stop. We know what you did. We know you wrote the note. We know you lied to me, and you lied to him. I have one question for you, Maya." "Why?" The silence on the other end stretched for an eternity. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all pretense, leaving only the raw, ugly core of her resentment. "Because you didn't deserve it," she hissed. "None of it. And I wanted you to know what it felt like to be alone. To be left with nothing." Chloe closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She didn't scream or cry. She simply said, "Goodbye, Maya," and ended the call. She then blocked the number. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, decisive amputation, the severing of a gangrenous limb to save the whole. It was an ending, and a painful, necessary beginning. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet reclamation. The house, once a crime scene of emotional trauma, slowly began to feel like a home again. The work was not easy. It was a conscious, daily effort. For Liam, it meant fundamentally rewiring the habits of a lifetime. He delegated major projects at work, shocking his partners by leaving the office at 5 o'clock sharp every day. He started turning his phone off when he got home, trading spreadsheets for conversations. He learned the art of being present. He would sit in Chloe's studio, not talking, just watching her paint, breathing in the scent of turpentine and linseed oil. He learned that his presence was more valuable than any paycheck. He massaged her swollen feet, cooked her dinner, and read to her belly at night, his voice a low rumble against her skin. He wasn't just being a good husband. He was actively falling in love with his wife all over again, discovering the strong, resilient woman who had weathered a storm he had helped create. This was his redemption, not in a grand gesture, but in 1,000 small, consistent acts of attention and love. For Chloe, healing came with a brush in her hand. She returned to the nursery mural with a vengeance. The pale, hesitant moon she had abandoned was now transformed. She filled it with deep, vibrant craters of silver and gold. The stars around it were not gentle twinkles, but explosive, dynamic bursts of light. It was a cosmos filled with strength and resilience. Her art, which she feared losing, became the very tool of her salvation. It was how she processed the betrayal, the fear and the anger. They went to therapy together. In the neutral space of a therapist's office, they learned a new language for their fears and needs. They confronted the uncomfortable truth that Maya's attack had only been successful because there were already cracks in their foundation. They had been functioning as two separate entities under one roof, both lonely in their own way. The crisis had shattered that dynamic, forcing them to rebuild as a true partnership. One Saturday afternoon, as Chloe put the finishing touches on the mural, Liam came in with 2 cups of tea. He stood beside her, looking at the finished wall. It was magnificent. The moon seemed to glow with an inner light, and the stars pulsed with energy. In the corner, nestled among a swirl of nebulae, she had painted a tiny, perfect rendering of their house. "It's the most beautiful thing you've ever painted," he said, his voice thick with awe. "It's about resilience," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's about how the universe is made of chaos and explosions, but it still creates things of beauty. It holds itself together." He wrapped his arm around her, his hand resting on top of hers on her belly. Their daughter kicked, a strong, definitive thump against their palms. They both laughed, a genuine, easy sound that had been absent for too long. "She likes it," Liam whispered. "She'd better," Chloe smiled. "It's her view. There was no formal resolution with Maya. A lawyer sent a cease and desist letter, and she faded from their lives, a toxic ghost in their shared history. Forgiveness was a continent Chloe was not yet ready to explore, and Liam felt no need to push her. Their focus was forward, on the 3 of them. The redemptive arc wasn't about forgiving the betrayer. It was about the 2 of them healing the wounds within their own marriage, and in doing so, saving each other. They had earned this peace, brushstroke by brushstroke, conversation by conversation. They were not the same people they were a few months ago. They were stronger, more honest, and more deeply connected than ever before. Amelia Hayes was born on a crisp October morning, just as the sun was beginning to cast a golden glow over the city. She arrived with a full head of dark hair, Chloe's deep blue eyes, and a cry that was surprisingly robust. Holding her for the first time, Liam felt a love so fierce and absolute it was like the world shifting on its axis. He looked over at Chloe, her face tired but luminous, and saw his entire universe there in that hospital bed. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, fumbling diaper changes, and the overwhelming, constant thrum of love for the tiny person who had taken over their lives. The trauma of the preceding months did not simply vanish. It lingered in the quiet moments. Sometimes, Liam would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom image of the empty house flashing in his mind. Chloe, too, had moments where a shadow would cross her face, the echo of her sister's cruelty. But the presence of Amelia was a powerful antidote. Her needs were immediate and all-consuming, pulling them relentlessly into the present. Her gurgling laughs were a balm, her tiny hand, gripping his finger, a profound anchor. One evening, about a month after Amelia was born, Liam was rocking her in the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft light of the mural's moon. Chloe came and stood in the doorway, watching them. She was no longer just the woman he loved. She was the mother of his child, a title she wore with a natural grace that defied all her previous fears. "She loves the moon," Chloe whispered. "She just stares at it. She knows good art," Liam murmured, his eyes locked on his daughter's peaceful face. He looked up at Chloe, his heart full. "I never said it enough before, but I'm so proud of you, of the art you make, of the mother you are, of the woman you've always been. Chloe walked over and wrapped her arms around him and the baby, resting her cheek on his shoulder. They stood there for a long time, a small family framed by a universe of painted stars, breathing in the quiet rhythm of their new life. The scars of Maya's betrayal were still there, faint white lines on the fabric of their history, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were proof of what they had survived. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale anymore, if it ever was. It was a real story, etched with pain, resilience, and a hard-won, beautiful truth. They had faced the absolute worst kind of deception, one that came from within their own family, and they had not only survived it, but had emerged with a bond that was stronger and more authentic than before. Holding his wife and daughter in the room that had once been the scene of a crime, Liam knew this was not a happy ending. It was something far better. It was a hopeful, honest beginning. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. The story of Liam and Chloe is a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals come from those we trust the most, and that true redemption is found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, daily work of showing up for the ones you love. It shows us that even when trust is shattered, a foundation can be rebuilt, stronger and more honest than before. If their story of resilience, love, and the fight for truth touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a story with real depth. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more powerful dramas that explore the complex realities of life and love. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of their story resonated with you the most? Robert Kemp had everything a man could dream of: a billion-dollar empire, a penthouse that scraped the New York skyline, and a wife whose beauty was the envy of his circle. But from his sterile glass office, 30 floors above the city, he watched the storm clouds gather, an ominous mirror to the tempest brewing in his own home. He had become a ghost in his marriage, haunted by ambition and a secret that lived on his phone under a different name. He believed he had all the time in the world to fix it, to choose his wife, Rachel, and their unborn child. But that night, as the rain lashed against the windows and he saw her frail figure collapse on the slick pavement below, he realized time had just run out. He thought the tragedy was the storm, the collapse, the betrayal. He was wrong. The real storm was what she did next. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on wealth. It was all clean lines, Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan. Robert Kemp stood before one of these windows, not admiring the view, but watching his own reflection superimposed over the sprawling city lights. He saw the sharp cut of his Tom Ford suit, the glint of his Patek Philippe watch, and the weary set of his jaw. He was the king of this kingdom, but the crown felt heavier than it ever had. Behind him, Rachel moved through the cavernous living room like a whisper. She used to fill this space with laughter and the scent of the oil paints she loved. Now, her presence was almost apologetic. He heard the soft clink of a ceramic mug on the granite countertop. "Robert, I made some chamomile tea," she said, her voice soft, trying to find a crack in the wall of his focus. "Thanks, Lena," he murmured, his eyes still locked on the phone in his hand. The numbers on the screen represented the final push for the Aperture Tech acquisition, a deal that would cement his legacy, a deal worth more than most small countries. It was all he could think about. She drifted closer, her hand resting tentatively on his arm. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, a reaction born of a guilt so profound it had become a part of his physical wiring. He'd been working late for months. Working was the official term. Isabel Moreau, the brilliant and ruthless head of his European division, was the unofficial one. Their relationship was a transaction of ambition and convenience, a sterile affair that took place in 5-star hotels and private jets. A world away from this home he was slowly poisoning. "You seem so far away," Rachel said, her thumb stroking the sleeve of his suit. "Is everything okay with the deal?" "It's the final stretch. High stakes. You know how it is," he said, the excuse tasting like ash in his mouth. He finally turned to her, really looking at her for the first time all evening. Her normally vibrant face was pale, and there were faint, lavender shadows under her kind, brown eyes. She was wearing one of his old, oversized cashmere sweaters, and it only emphasized her fragility. He felt a pang of something, not just guilt, but a deep, aching loss for the man he used to be with her. The man who would have dropped everything to listen. "I have something to tell you," she said, a nervous energy fluttering in her voice. "Something that might help. Ground us again." He forced a smile, pocketing his phone. "I'm all ears." She took a deep breath and led him to the sofa, her hands trembling slightly as she held his. "We've been talking about it for so long, about when the right time would be. With your work being so crazy, I know it's never seemed perfect. But maybe this is what makes it perfect." She was rambling, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "What now?" She placed his hand on her flat stomach. The cashmere was soft beneath his palm. "Robert," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The words hit him like a physical blow. A baby, a child, a life that would bind him to this home, to this woman, forever. A decade ago, this would have been his ultimate dream. He and Rachel building a family in the city they loved. But now it felt like a complication, another variable in an equation he could no longer control. His mind wasn't on a nursery. It was on hostile takeovers, and Isabel's sharp, strategic mind that mirrored his own. He looked at Rachel's hopeful face, at the pure, unadulterated joy in her eyes, and the lie was already forming on his lips. "Lena, that's amazing news." He pulled her into a hug, the gesture stiff and unnatural. He was holding his wife, the mother of his child, but his mind was across the ocean, in a different city, with a different woman. As he held her, he felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. A text message. He knew exactly who it was from. And in that moment, holding his pregnant wife, Robert Kemp knew he was a fraud of the highest order. The days that followed Rachel's announcement were a masterclass in deception. Robert played the part of the expectant father with chilling precision. He accompanied her to the first doctor's appointment, watching the grainy, pulsing image on the ultrasound screen with feigned awe. He held her hand, squeezed it at the right moments, and said all the right things. "A heartbeat," he'd whispered, his voice thick with a performance that deserved an award. "Our baby's heartbeat." But his heart wasn't in that sterile, hopeful room. It was in encrypted emails and hushed late-night calls. The Aperture Tech deal was entering its most volatile phase. Isabel was his general on the front lines in London, and their communication was constant, a blend of corporate strategy and the clipped, intimate shorthand of their affair. "The board is wavering, Robert. We need a show of force." Isabel's voice would crackle through his high-tech earpiece as he stared out at the city, Rachel sleeping peacefully in their bed, just a room away. "I'll be there Monday," he'd promised, the lie slipping out easily. He'd tell Rachel it was a last-minute emergency board meeting, a fire he had to put out in person. She was always so understanding. too understanding. Her trust was a knife he twisted in his own gut with every lie he told. Rachel, meanwhile, tried to build a nest in their cold, modern penthouse. She brought home books on parenting, fabric swatches for a nursery, and organic prenatal vitamins that sat accusingly on the kitchen counter. She was trying to build a bridge back to him, brick by hopeful brick, and he was letting her do it, knowing a tidal wave was coming. The storm, both literal and metaphorical, began on a Thursday night. A fierce nor'easter was barreling toward the city, and the sky had been a bruised purple all day. Robert was on a conference call in his home office, the door shut but not quite latched. It was a tense negotiation with Aperture's primary shareholders, and Isabel was on the line from London, her voice sharp and commanding. "They're trying to leverage the media against us, Robert. We need to kill that narrative before it gets legs," Isabel said, her French accent sharpening with urgency. "I'll have my PR team draft a statement immediately," Robert replied, pacing the length of the office. "No, it needs to come from you. A personal touch," she insisted. "You'll be here Monday. We can strategize over dinner Sunday night. Just us." There was an intimacy in her tone that was more than professional. A shared history of battles, won in the boardroom and celebrated in the bedroom. "I miss you," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Meant only for him. He didn't respond to that part, acutely aware of the paper-thin walls of his life. But it was too late. Rachel had been walking past the office, a plate of sliced apples in her hand, a peace offering for his stressful day. She'd heard Isabel's voice, a voice she recognized from company galas and shareholder reports. But it was the tone that made her freeze, the possessiveness, the familiarity. "I miss you." The three simple words landed like stones, shattering the fragile glass of her denial. She pushed the door open slightly. Robert stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the window where lightning was beginning to fork across the sky. He was completely absorbed, a different man from the one who had smiled at the ultrasound. This was the real Robert, the one she had been losing for months. He ended the call and turned, finally noticing her in the doorway. The plate of apples slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. "Lena?" he asked, his face a mask of concern, but his eyes, for a split second, flashed with the panic of being caught. "Who is Isabel Moreau to you, Robert?" she asked, her voice quiet and dangerously steady. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, devastating question. "She's my colleague, head of the European division. You know that," he said, taking a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Don't," she warned, holding up a hand. The first tear escaped, tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Don't lie to me." I heard her. The way she spoke to you, the air crackled with a tension that rivaled the storm outside. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windows, like accusations being thrown from the heavens. He could see the dawning, horrific realization in her eyes. The later nights, the sudden trips, the emotional distance, all the scattered pieces were clicking into place for her, forming a picture of betrayal so ugly it stole her breath. "Rachel, it's not what you think," he began, the most pathetic and predictable of all clichés. "Isn't it?" she whispered, her gaze dropping to her stomach, her hand instinctively moving to shield the tiny, innocent life within. "Or is it exactly what I think? The shattered plate on the floor was a prelude. The real explosion came next. Rachel's quiet devastation erupted into a storm of grief and rage that had been brewing for months. All this time," she choked out, her voice raw. "All those late nights you were closing a deal. All those trips to put out fires. Was she the fire, Robert? Was our marriage the thing you were trying to escape?" Robert felt the walls of his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every lie, every evasion was being laid bare under the harsh light of her pain. Rachel, it's complicated. The business? Don't you dare hide behind your business, she shrieked, the sound foreign and terrifying coming from her. This isn't about business. This is about us. This is about you looking me in the eye at our first ultrasound and telling me you loved me while you were sleeping with another woman. The rain was a torrential downpour now, hammering against the windows in furious, percussive blasts. The wind howled, a symphony for their marital collapse. It wasn't like that, he insisted, his voice rising. It was a mistake, a symptom of the pressure I've been under. A mistake? She repeated, a hollow, bitter laugh escaping her lips. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is not setting the alarm. This is a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to betray our child before it's even born. Her words were daggers, each one finding its mark. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to somehow absorb her pain, but he knew he was the source of it. He was the poison. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text. Then another. It was Isabel. The shareholders are calling an emergency virtual meeting, midnight London time. You need to be on this call, Robert. This is it. Midnight in London was 7 p.m. in New York. Right now. He glanced at his phone, a flicker of instinct, and Rachel saw it. Her eyes, red-rimmed and filled with tears, narrowed with a new, colder fury. Of course, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a chilling resignation. Even now, she's more important. The deal is more important. Lena, that's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was torn. The call was the culmination of 2 years of work, his legacy, his empire. But his wife, his pregnant wife, was falling apart in front of him. I need some air, she said numbly, turning and walking toward the door, her movements robotic. Air! Rachel, look outside! There's a hurricane out there, he yelled, panicked. Where are you going? Away from you, she said, her voice flat. She pulled on a thin raincoat, her hands shaking too much to properly button it. I can't breathe in here anymore. I can't breathe the same air as you. She pulled the heavy door open and stepped out into the hallway. He started to go after her, but his phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was his COO. Robert, you need to get on the line now. They're threatening to walk. He was frozen in a moment of impossible choice. His entire professional life on one line, his entire personal life walking out the door. In a moment of catastrophic misjudgment, driven by the adrenaline of the deal, he chose the call. I'll just stabilize this. Then I'll go after her, he told himself. She'll just go down to the lobby and cool off. He answered the call, his voice a strained, false calm. I'm here. Let's handle this. He walked back to the window of his office as he talked, his words about market caps and shareholder value a meaningless drone in his ears. He scanned the street below, searching for her. And then he saw her. Rachel hadn't gone to the lobby. She had walked out onto the street, into the full fury of the storm. The wind whipped her raincoat around her, and the rain plastered her hair to her face. She looked small and lost, a solitary figure in the chaos of the weather. She took a few unsteady steps, then swayed. From 30 floors up, it was like watching a silent movie. He saw her hand go to her stomach. He saw her knees buckle. He saw her collapse onto the wet, glistening pavement. A fallen leaf in a raging river. No, he breathed into the phone. The voices of the shareholders faded into a dull roar. The billion-dollar deal vanished. The only thing in the world was the image of his wife, his pregnant wife, lying motionless in the middle of a storm he had created, He dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the voices still chattering from the speaker. He didn't hear them. He was already running, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. He had made his choice. And it was the wrong one. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Robert jabbed the lobby button repeatedly, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The calm, calculating CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified husband. He burst out of the building's grand entrance, the doorman shouting after him, and ran into the deluge. The rain was cold and stinging, soaking his suit in seconds. He saw her immediately, a small heap on the dark, rain-slicked asphalt. A taxi swerved violently to avoid her. "Rachel!" he screamed, his voice swallowed by the wind. He reached her side, dropping to his knees on the pavement. Her face was terrifyingly pale, her eyes closed. He felt for a pulse in her neck, his fingers clumsy and shaking. It was there. Faint, but there. "Somebody help!" he roared at the indifferent city. "Call 911. He gently cradled her head, trying to shield her from the worst of the rain with his own body. "Lena, I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words a useless, pathetic mantra. "Please wake up. Please be okay." The wail of a siren cut through the storm's howl. Paramedics were there within minutes, their movements efficient and urgent. They loaded Rachel onto a stretcher, her face stark white against the red canvas. Robert tried to climb into the ambulance with her, but a paramedic held him back. "Sir, we need room to work. Follow us to Lenox Hill Hospital." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and it sped away, its lights painting streaks of red and white on the wet streets. Robert was left standing alone in the storm, dripping and broken. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his actions. This wasn't a negotiation he could win or a problem he could throw money at. This was a consequence, real and terrifying. At the hospital, the minutes bled into hours. He sat in a sterile, beige waiting room, the smell of antiseptic burning his nostrils. He had called her emergency contact, her best friend Clara, who arrived looking like a storm cloud herself, her eyes shooting daggers of pure hatred at him. "What did you do to her?" Clara demanded, her voice low and venomous. Robert started, but no words came. What could he say? "I broke her heart and she collapsed from the stress. I prioritized a business deal over my pregnant wife." Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Vance?" Robert shot to his feet. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "Your wife is stable," the doctor said, his expression grim. "She suffered from a vasovagal syncope episode, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, likely brought on by extreme emotional distress. It caused her to faint. We're keeping her overnight for observation. The baby's heartbeat is stable for now, but this was a significant shock to her system. She needs to avoid all forms of stress." The doctor's gaze was pointed, leaving no doubt who he considered the primary source of that stress. The relief that washed over Robert was so immense, his legs nearly gave out. But it was short-lived, replaced by a new wave of dread. Rachel was awake. She was asking to see Clara, not him. He waited another hour before Clara emerged, her face softened slightly with pity. "She'll see you now. Be gentle, Robert. For God's sake, just be gentle." He walked into the private room on trembling legs. Rachel was sitting up in bed, looking impossibly small against the white pillows. An IV was taped to her hand. She looked exhausted, fragile, but as he met her gaze, he saw something new in her eyes. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a calm, unbreakable resolve. The fire of her anger had burned out, leaving behind something harder, like tempered steel. "Lena, he started, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am." She held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice when she spoke, was quiet, devoid of the emotion from before. It was that very lack of emotion that terrified him. "I've had a lot of time to think, lying here," she said, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall just past his shoulder. "About us. About this baby." "We can fix this," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I'll cancel the trip. I'll sell the company. I don't care. I'll do anything." "No, you won't," she said simply. "Because this isn't about one deal or one trip, Robert. It's about who you are. Your ambition is a hunger that will never be full. I thought I could be enough. I thought this baby would be enough. But we'll always just be an inconvenient distraction from your real love." "That's not true." She finally looked at him, and the coldness in her eyes chilled him to the bone. This was her stunning move. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a demand, it was a declaration. "It's over, Robert," she said. The words were delivered without malice, as a simple statement of fact. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to scream anymore. I'm just done. I'm filing for divorce." He stared at her, speechless. He had expected tears, ultimatums, a chance to bargain. He had not expected this quiet, final severance. "I will not raise my child in a house filled with lies and ghosts," she continued, her hand resting on her stomach. "This baby deserves a mother who isn't waiting by the window for a husband who will never truly come home. So you can have your empire. You can have your deal. You can have Isabel. I am taking my child, and I am building a life, a real one, somewhere else." She had taken the biggest crisis of their lives, the moment of her greatest vulnerability, and found in it a strength he had never seen. She wasn't a victim collapsing in the storm. She was a survivor walking out of the wreckage, and she was leaving him behind. Robert returned to the penthouse the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city scrubbed clean and glistening under a pale, watery sun. But inside his home, the storm raged on. The silence was the first thing that hit him. It was a physical presence, vast and suffocating. The air was still, heavy with the echoes of last night's fight. The shattered apple plate had been cleaned up by the overnight staff, but the ghost of it remained. Rachel was gone. He walked through the rooms, a trespasser in his own life. Half the clothes in her closet were missing. Her favorite books were gone from the nightstand. The small wooden easel she kept in the corner of the living room, which she hadn't used in years but refused to part with, was gone. The only thing she'd left behind was a single, framed photo on his bedside table, a picture of them from their honeymoon in Italy, young and ridiculously happy, their faces lit by the Tuscan sun. It was a cruel reminder of the man he'd once been. His phone, which he'd retrieved from his office, buzzed with notifications, emails of congratulations, texts from his board. The Aperture Tech deal had closed in the early hours of the morning. His gambit had paid off. He was now, by all metrics, more powerful and successful than ever. The deal of a lifetime was done. He stared at the email from his COO, the subject line in all caps. "We did it!" He felt nothing. The triumphant thrill he had chased for 2 years was completely absent. The victory was hollow, a feast of ashes. He had won the world and lost his soul. The days turned into a week, then 2. Robert moved through his life like an automaton. He went to meetings, made decisions, and managed his empire with the same ruthless efficiency as always. But it was a performance. Inside, he was spiraling. He'd try to call Rachel, but the calls went straight to voicemail. His texts, increasingly desperate pleas for a conversation, remained unanswered, a string of stark blue bubbles with no reply. She had blocked him completely. He sent flowers to Clara's apartment, where he assumed Rachel was staying. They were returned the next day with a curt note. "She doesn't want them." He had his lawyer reach out to her, and the response came back through her own attorney, a woman with a reputation for being a shark. The message was cold and clear. All communication would be through legal channels. The divorce papers were being drawn up. The penthouse became his prison. Every object mocked him. He saw Rachel in the curve of the sofa where she used to read, in the kitchen where she'd tried to teach him how to cook, in the empty space beside him, in their sprawling bed. He stopped sleeping, haunted by the image of her collapsing in the rain. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart hammering, the sound of the ambulance siren echoing in the silent room. One night, drowning in whiskey and self-loathing, he found a box in the back of a storage closet. It was filled with Rachel's old sketchbooks. He sat on the floor and flipped through them. There were charcoal sketches of the city, watercolors of flowers, and countless portraits of him. Early in their relationship, she had drawn him constantly. Robert laughing, Robert sleeping, Robert staring thoughtfully into the distance. She had seen him, really seen him, with an artist's eye and a lover's heart. The last drawing in the final book was from a year ago. It was a sketch of his back as he sat at his desk, his face illuminated only by the glow of his laptop. The drawing was stark, lonely, and unfinished. She had stopped seeing his face, and only saw his back. She had seen him turning away long before he had. The realization was a gut punch. This wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a slow, creeping decay he had been too blind and too arrogant to notice. His ambition hadn't just been a distraction. It had been an eraser, slowly wiping away the color and life from their marriage, until only a faint, sad outline was left. He finally called Isabel. She answered, her voice bright and victorious. "Robert, I was wondering when you'd call to celebrate. I've booked our usual spot at Le Bernardin for tonight." He stood up, the sketchbook still in his hand, and walked to the window overlooking the city he had conquered. "It's over, Isabel," he said, his voice flat and dead. There was a pause. "The deal is done, Robert. What's over?" "Us," he clarified. "This, whatever it was. It's over. It was a mistake." He could hear her sharp intake of breath, the surprise and indignation, but he didn't care. He ended the call before she could reply, tossing the phone onto the sofa. Ending it with Isabel wasn't a solution. It was just one small, pathetic step on a long, dark road of atonement. He had to fix himself before he could even begin to ask for a chance to be a father to his child. The silence of the penthouse pressed in, and for the first time, Robert Kemp began to listen. While Robert was rattling around in his gilded cage, Rachel was starting over in a small, second-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that belonged to her friend, Clara. The place was cluttered with books, half-finished canvases, and the comforting scent of coffee and turpentine. It was a world away from the sterile perfection of the penthouse, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel could breathe. The first week was a blur of exhaustion and grief. She slept, cried, and ate the simple, nourishing meals Clara put in front of her. She felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman she used to be. The trauma of the collapse and the subsequent hospital stay had left her physically weak, and the doctor's warning to avoid stress felt like a cruel joke. Her entire life was stress, but as her physical strength slowly returned, something else began to stir within her. A flicker of the old Rachel, the artist, the woman who existed before she became Mrs. Robert Kemp. One afternoon, Clara came home from her job as a gallery curator to find Rachel staring at a blank canvas that had been leaning against the wall. "I haven't painted in 3 years," Rachel said softly, her hand hovering over the pristine white surface. "Robert, He said the fumes weren't good for the penthouse's air filtration system. Clara snorted. Robert wouldn't know a real thing if it hit him in his custom-tailored suit. The only thing he filters is his conscience. She put a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. Maybe it's time to make a mess. That evening, Rachel picked up a piece of charcoal. Her hand felt clumsy at first, the muscle memory buried under years of disuse. But then, she began to draw. She didn't think. She just let the emotions flow out of her fingertips and onto the canvas. She drew the storm, not the literal one, but the emotional tempest that had been her life. Dark, swirling lines, flashes of jagged white, and at the center, a small, protected space, a calm eye in the hurricane. It was raw, chaotic, and deeply honest. For the next few months, painting became her therapy and her salvation. She poured all her pain, her anger, and her burgeoning hope into her work. The canvases piled up in the small apartment, abstract explorations of betrayal, portraits of strength emerging from sorrow, and vibrant, hopeful landscapes that represented the future she was determined to build for her child. She was no longer just the millionaire's discarded wife. She was an artist, reclaiming her voice, brushstroke by brushstroke. Her belly grew, a constant, gentle reminder of the new life she was protecting. She talked to the baby constantly, promising it a world filled with color, love, and honesty. This child would not be raised in the shadow of a glass tower, defined by its father's wealth. This child would be raised in the light. Her lawyer, a formidable woman named Margaret, handled the divorce proceedings with brutal efficiency. Robert's first offer was, predictably, a monetary one. A settlement so large it was obscene, a trust fund for the baby that would ensure it never wanted for anything. Rachel's response, delivered through Margaret, was swift and unequivocal. "I don't want his money. I want his accountability." She wasn't going to be bought off. She would accept child support, as was the baby's right, but she refused any personal alimony. She would make her own way. Her demands were not financial. They were personal. She wanted a clear, legally binding co-parenting plan. She wanted Robert to attend parenting classes. She wanted him to undergo therapy to deal with his work addiction and narcissism. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to ensure that their child would have a father who was present, not just a benefactor who was absent. Margaret was stunned. "In 20 years of divorce law, I've never had a client turn down a settlement like that," she told Rachel over the phone. "You're either crazy or the strongest woman I've ever met." "I'm a mother," Rachel replied simply. "My child's well-being is not for sale." Her strength wasn't loud or aggressive. It was a quiet, deep-rooted power that had grown in the ruins of her old life. She was building a new foundation, not with marble and steel, but with paint, courage, and a fierce, protective love for the baby growing inside her. She was terrified, yes, but for the first time in years, she felt truly, authentically alive. She was no longer a reflection of Robert's success. She was the creator of her own. The meeting took place in a neutral, sterile conference room at a mediation firm in Midtown. It was the first time Robert and Rachel had been in the same room in 4 months. The air was thick with unspoken words and the formal presence of their lawyers. Robert saw her the moment she walked in. Pregnancy suited her. It had softened the sharp edges of her grief, replacing them with a quiet, powerful glow. She carried herself with a newfound confidence that was both beautiful and intimidating. She met his gaze for a brief second, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention to her lawyer, Margaret. The dismissal was more painful than any angry tirade. Robert had spent the last 4 months in his own personal hell. He had done what she'd asked. He'd found a therapist, a no-nonsense psychiatrist who specialized in high-powered executives with personality disorders. The sessions were brutal, forcing Robert to confront the empty, validation-seeking void that drove him. He had also enrolled in a parenting class in a community center downtown, sitting awkwardly in a circle of plastic chairs with a dozen other expectant couples, learning how to swaddle a doll and change a diaper. He was the only one there alone. He was changing, but he knew it was just a start. He wasn't doing it to win her back. He knew that bridge had been burned. He was doing it for the child. He was doing it so he could one day look his son or daughter in the eye and not see a reflection of his own failures. "Mr. Vance," Margaret began, her voice crisp and businesslike, "my client has reviewed your initial proposal. While she appreciates the financial provisions for the child, she finds them insufficient in other areas." Robert's lawyer, a slick corporate litigator named Arthur, shifted in his seat. "Insufficient? The trust is ironclad. The child will be set for life." Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice calm and steady. "My child already is set for life, Arthur. It will have a mother who loves it unconditionally. What is in question is whether it will have a father." The words hung in the air. Robert felt his cheeks burn with shame. "Rachel is proposing a detailed co-parenting agreement," Margaret continued, sliding a thick document across the polished table. "It outlines visitation schedules, holiday arrangements, and decisions regarding education and healthcare. It also includes several stipulations." Arthur picked up the document and began to read, his eyebrows rising higher with every page. "Mandatory therapy sessions for Mr. Vance to continue for a minimum of 2 years. Completion of 3 separate parenting courses. A probationary period of supervised visitation for the first 6 months. This is unorthodox." "This is non-negotiable," Rachel said firmly. Robert didn't even look at the document. He looked at Rachel. "I'll do it," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Arthur turned to him, astonished. "Robert, let's discuss this. Some of these clauses could be seen as punitive." "They're not punitive, Arthur. They're prudent," Robert said, never taking his eyes off Rachel. "She's right. I haven't earned the right to be called a father yet. I need to show that I can be one." He turned his full attention to his estranged wife. "I'll sign it. I'll do all of it, Rachel, and more. Whatever it takes." For the first time, a flicker of surprise registered in her eyes. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, another example of him trying to leverage his power. She had not expected this quiet, immediate capitulation. "The agreement also states," Margaret added, pressing on, "that you are not to have overnight contact with Isabel Morrow or any other romantic partner during your parenting time for the first 5 years. This was the final test, a direct shot at the source of the betrayal. Isabel and I are no longer associated, personally or professionally," Robert stated, his voice even. "She resigned from the company 2 months ago. That clause will not be an issue." The room fell silent. Rachel stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time since that horrible night. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in years. Sincerity. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. He was simply agreeing. "Very well," Margaret said, closing her folder. "We'll have the final documents drawn up for your signature." As they all stood to leave, Robert spoke again. "Rachel, wait." She paused at the door, her back to him. "The nursery," he said, his voice catching slightly. I had it finished, the way you wanted, with the mural of the stars on the ceiling you showed me a picture of. If you ever need anything from the apartment, or if you just want to see it, it's there. For the baby." She didn't turn around, but she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Then she walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, having just signed away his power and taken the first, terrifying step toward earning back his humanity. 5 months later, in the dead of a cold January night, Robert's phone rang. He had been dozing in a chair in his silent, cavernous living room, a book about infant sleep patterns lying open on his chest. He grabbed the phone, his heart instantly hammering. The caller ID read, "Clara." "Robert, it's time." Clara's voice was tense but steady. "Her water broke an hour ago. We're at Lenox Hill." "I'm on my way," he said, already on his feet, pulling on the shoes he'd left by the door for this exact moment. He had a bag packed in his car, not for him, but for Rachel, filled with the snacks, comfortable socks and coconut water her birth plan had specified. He had memorized the entire document. This was the moment his therapy and parenting classes had been leading up to. His therapist's voice echoed in his head. "Your role is not to demand, but to support. You are not the protagonist of this story, Robert. You are a supporting actor. Show up, be quiet, and do whatever she asks of you." He broke every speed limit getting to the hospital, his mind a silent prayer. Let her be okay. Let the baby be okay. He found Clara in the waiting room of the maternity ward, pacing a hole in the linoleum floor. "How is she?" he asked, breathless. "She's a warrior," Clara said, her eyes red-rimmed. "The contractions are getting intense. She's in the room at the end of the hall, room 612. Did she ask for me?" Robert asked, his hope fragile. Clara gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and exasperation. "No, Robert. She's a little busy right now, but she didn't say you couldn't be here. That's your olive branch. Don't mess it up." He nodded, understanding. He walked to the end of the hall and stood outside room 612. Through the small window in the door, he could see Rachel. Her face was contorted in pain, her hands gripping the bed rails. A nurse was coaching her through a contraction. His first instinct was to burst in, to hold her hand, to tell her she could do it, but he stopped himself. That was what the old Robert would have done. Made the moment about him, about his need to be the hero. The new Robert understood. This was her space, her battle. He was here to offer support, not to invade. So he waited. He sat on the hard plastic chair outside her door and waited. For hours. He listened to her pained cries and the calm, encouraging murmurs of the nurses and Clara. He fielded calls from his office, telling his assistant to cancel his entire week. "It's a family emergency," he said, and for the first time the words felt true. His family was in that room, and his empire could burn to the ground for all he cared. A nurse on her break saw him sitting there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face etched with worry. "You the father?" she asked kindly. "I'm trying to be," he answered honestly. "She's strong," the nurse said with a smile. "You've got a fighter in there." After what felt like a lifetime, a new sound cut through the air. Not a cry of pain, but a cry of life. The thin, mighty wail of a newborn baby. Tears streamed down Robert's face. He buried his head in his hands, overcome with a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled him. Relief, joy, and a profound, bottomless love for a person he hadn't even met yet. He stayed where he was, giving them their time. 10 minutes later, the door opened. It was Clara, her face beaming and tear-streaked. "It's a girl, Robert," she whispered. "She's perfect. Rachel's asking for you." He stood up, his legs shaking, and walked into the room. The scent of new life was in the air. Rachel was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, looking more beautiful and exhausted than he had ever seen her. And in her arms, wrapped in a pink and white striped blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby with a tuft of dark hair. He approached the bed slowly, reverently. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man, humbled and broken and remade, standing in the presence of a miracle he had almost thrown away. The hospital room felt like a sacred space. The chaotic energy of labor had been replaced by a deep, peaceful quiet, punctuated only by the soft, snuffly sounds of the baby. Robert stood by the bed, his hands clasped behind his back, feeling like an intruder on a holy scene. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes weary but clear. The anger and resentment that had been a wall between them for so long seemed to have dissolved, washed away by the tidal wave of childbirth. In its place was a shared vulnerability. "She's beautiful, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick. "She looks like you," Rachel said softly, a faint smile touching her lips as she looked down at the baby's face. Poor thing. It was a joke, a tiny sliver of their old rapport, and it felt like a gift, a small measure of grace. Do you want to hold her?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He just nodded, unable to speak. He washed his hands at the sink, the motions slow and deliberate, then sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. Rachel carefully, expertly, transferred the warm, precious bundle into his arms. The baby was so light, so impossibly small. She squirmed and made a little noise, her tiny, wrinkled face bunching up. Her eyes were closed, her eyelashes fine as silk. Robert stared at her, completely mesmerized. This was his daughter, a real, living, breathing piece of his heart, now existing outside of his body. He felt the weight of his failures, the selfishness of his ambition, the cruelty of his betrayal, all crashing down on him. But as he looked at this perfect, innocent life, he also felt a powerful, cleansing wave of purpose. This was his chance to atone, not with words or money, but with a lifetime of devotion. Have you thought of a name?" he asked, his gaze never leaving his daughter's face. "I was thinking, Lily," Rachel said, "for new beginnings, for purity." "Lily," Robert repeated. "Lily Vance. It's perfect." He looked up at Rachel, his eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you, Rachel, for this gift. For not shutting me out completely." "She deserves a father," Rachel said, her voice tired but firm. "Whether you deserve to be one is up to you to prove from this moment on." There was no magical forgiveness in her words, no promise of a reconciled future. It was a statement of fact, a challenge, and it was a challenge he was ready to spend the rest of his life meeting. He spent the next hour just holding Lily, studying every detail of her face, letting her tiny fingers curl around his thumb. He and Rachel didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They were no longer husband and wife, but they were now linked in the most profound way possible. They were parents, co-creators of this new life. When a nurse came in to check on Rachel, Robert carefully handed Lily back to her mother. As he stood up to leave, to give them space, he paused. "I meant what I said, Lena," he said quietly, "about doing whatever it takes. I know I broke our life, but I will not fail this one. I will not fail her." Rachel simply nodded, her eyes on the beautiful baby in her arms. He walked out of the hospital into the crisp, pre-dawn air. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the city in shades of soft pink and grey. The world felt new. The old Robert Kemp had died in that silent, lonely penthouse. The man who walked out of the hospital was someone different. He was Lily's father, and that was a title he was determined to earn. 2 years passed. Life did not snap back into a fairy tale. There was no grand romantic reunion. Instead, something quieter, more realistic, and ultimately more profound took root. A partnership. Robert kept his word. He was a constant, steady presence in Lily's life. He finished his parenting courses. He never missed a therapy session. He adhered to every clause of their co-parenting agreement with a devotion that surprised even his own lawyer. He learned to be a father not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday moments. He mastered the art of the diaper change, learned to distinguish the hungry cry from the tired cry, and could recite every word to Lily's favorite bedtime story, Good Night Moon. He downsized his life, selling the cold, cavernous penthouse and moving into a more modest, though still luxurious, brownstone in the West Village. It had a small backyard, which he filled with a swing set and a sandbox. He restructured his company, delegating more, traveling less, and making it a non-negotiable rule that he was unreachable between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. every night, Lily's bath time and bedtime. Rachel, free from the constraints of her old life, flourished. She had moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn, a sunny space with a large studio room. Her art, born from pain, had evolved. It became bolder, more vibrant. Her collection, which she titled The Storm and the Calm, was featured in Clara's gallery. It was a critical and commercial success. She was no longer Rachel Vance, the millionaire's wife. She was Rachel Hayes, an artist whose work spoke of resilience and rebirth. They co-parented with a quiet respect and efficiency that sometimes felt more like a business arrangement. But it was one built on a foundation of trust that Robert was painstakingly rebuilding. Their handoffs in a park halfway between their homes were polite, focused on Lily's schedule, her latest word, or a funny face she had learned to make. One bright, crisp Saturday afternoon in autumn, they met at that park. Lily, now a bubbly toddler with her father's intense eyes and her mother's warm smile, was taking her first truly confident steps. She toddled on unsteady legs across the grass, a look of fierce concentration on her face. Robert and Rachel sat on a bench, a comfortable distance between them, watching her. "Her daycare teacher says she's the most determined child in the class," Rachel said, a proud smile on her face. "When she wants something, she doesn't give up." "She gets that from her mother," Robert said, his gaze soft as he watched his daughter. He meant it. He had once mistaken Rachel's kindness for weakness. He now knew it was the bedrock of a strength he could only dream of possessing. Rachel looked at him, a genuine, unguarded warmth in her eyes. "She gets it from both of us." It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt monumental. A recognition that they were a team, that Lily was a perfect fusion of their best parts. Lily, having successfully navigated a treacherous patch of grass, stopped and looked back. She saw both her parents watching her. She grinned, a wide, toothy grin, and then, for the first time, she walked a straight line, right from the spot where she stood, across the space that separated them. She walked away from her mother and straight into the waiting, open arms of her father. Robert lifted her up, burying his face in her soft curls, his heart swelling with a love so pure and powerful it almost hurt. He looked over at Rachel, who was watching them, her face illuminated by the afternoon sun. Their old love story was over. The book closed forever. But as they sat there, two separate people bound by a shared love for their child, it felt like they were just beginning to write a new one. It wasn't a story of romance, but one of redemption, respect, and the quiet, enduring grace of a second chance. The canvas of their future was different than they had ever imagined, but it was, in its own way, beautiful. Robert and Rachel's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest tragedies can lead to the most profound transformations. Their story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to change, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about how we choose to get back up and rebuild. What did you think of Rachel's decision to leave and build her own life? Could you forgive Robert? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.